Hello and welcome to Beyond Freud. So today we will be talking about listening as a therapeutic tool, and for this I decided to choose Salman Akhtar's Psychoanalytic Listening. So I chose this work not only because of it being a crucial therapy technique, but also because of my personal interest in the subject matter, listening. Something which I'm very keen to develop a much more academic interest in. So listening as the focus of this work, it highlights a new understanding of psychoanalysis, the work by Akhtar. And it says that, we always look at psychoanalysis as a talking cure, but it is also a listening cure. So Akhtar writes in the initial pages that listening with no talking can only go so far. Talking without listening can mislead and harm. This is what really interested me in the work, and I decided to take it forward and discuss it over here today. With the book, it's divided into 7 chapters, and they are as follows. So you have first the 4 kinds of analytic listening. You have listening to silence, to actions, to oneself, listening poorly, refusing to listen, and listening in non-clinical situations. In this video, I will be focusing on the first 3 chapters only to understand the various types of listening which the analyst does in the clinical space. In chapter 1, Akhtar provides a really short description of Freud's understanding of analytic listening. He also provides us the works where Freud has mentioned it. He talks about how Freud has talked about communication between the patient's and the analyst's unconscious, at the same time highlighting the risks which are there when the patient is not being listened to properly. So analytic listening as such, we can see that it includes verbal and non-verbal communication. This is where the advice of having free floating attention during the session is given, because there are multiple modes of communication in the work, and the analyst has to make sure that we do not face any resistance in our pathways to listening, which in turn also leads to an emphasis on the need for the analyst to undergo analysis themselves, so that we can understand what is coming from the patient with regard to the work and what is coming from the analyst, which might not be in relation to the work itself. So now Akhtar had taken the task in this chapter, to the first chapter, to give us a division of the analytic listening into 4. Towards the end of the chapter, he does warn us of the risk of oversimplification in simply blending all the models together. So instead, he asks us to respect their separateness as well as the harmony which does arise between the categories. So the 4 kinds of listening are objective listening, subjective listening, empathic listening, and intersubjective listening. Objective listening is born of the classical idea of human nature as being one which strives towards autonomy and the reign of reason. So in psychoanalysis, we understand this as the understanding that man is ruled by the pleasure principle, and maturity is when there is a predominance of the reality principle. It also includes the hermeneutics of skepticism in listening to the patient. As such, the analyst has to take a very detached outlook and be the bearer of the reality lens. Free association is then the way to go for objective listening, and attention is primarily given to the form of what is being said. This means that the analyst focuses on pauses, change of topic, like an abrupt change of topic, stuttering, and various other things. So Akhtar writes of this listening, it is propelled towards deciphering the ways in which the patient's wishes and fantasies color his perception of reality, past and present. In subjective listening, understanding has close links to intuition. Akhtar quotes Jacobs when he states that the main component of this listening is that the analyst should privately consider all that occurs within him for its potentially informative value in terms of the patient and in terms of what is taking place between them. The analyst has to rely on themselves, their inner feelings, thoughts, associations, and something which Jacob terms as body empathy for a well-attuned listening. Under the banner of subjective listening, Akhtar also talks of projective identification. Its use in the clinical sphere allows the analyst to experience what the patient is unable to bear and therefore presents in the clinical space in the non-verbal form. Therefore, this type of listening requires the analyst to also listen to themselves. Coming to empathic listening, Akhtar introduces this to us by the statement, the exact opposite of projective identification is empathy. Empathic listening requires the analyst to actively resonate with the patient's experience, unlike what we just discussed, wherein, like projective identification, wherein you are looking at what the patient is putting into the analyst. So in empathic listening, there is a controlled regression and controlled daydreaming on the analyst's end to identify with the patient, and then become the subject, and then project back to the patient what the analyst has tasted. So the romantic vision of psychoanalysis under analysts such as Kohut saw man as a being for whom development is to become a cohesive self. So mental suffering, consequently, it arises due to environmental failures in fulfilling the self-object function. There is thus a need to shift from listening from the outside to listening from the inside. Lastly, we have intersubjective listening, primarily derived from Sullivan's interpersonal view of psychoanalysis. Akhtar notes that this view declares that self is nothing but a collection of reflective appraisals, and anxiety can only occur in an interpersonal context. Analytic listening is therefore a shared process. But now what does that mean? It means that the clinical work which is occurring in the therapeutic space is the result of an interplay between two people, two selves, two subjectivities, and that the analytic material, including transference and countertransference, is co-constructed. For this, one can also refer to Thomas Ogden's analytic third to understand the concept. So there is something known as reciprocal listening, which is also occurring here, in that how the analyst is listening to the patient and how the patient is registering and interpreting what the analyst is saying, and how that alter what the analyst would say next, and so on. Analysis becomes something more than just uncovering, which was the classical aim and still is one of our aims, but goes beyond to include the idea of the creation of the analytic subject. So I believe this also refers to the process through which the patient actually comes to discover their patienthood. Akhtar ends the chapter with the title A Developmental Postscript, which then looks at listening as a maternal or paternal activity, in that different type of listenings refer to different parental positions. We now shift to other chapters which include listening to numerous events which occur in therapeutic work. The analyst then listens not only to words but silences, actions, and to also oneself. For Akhtar, silence can be of various types. So you have structural silence, where the patient organizes psychic material into tangible mental contents. Unmentalized silence, which refers to a silence or a pause or a stop in content arising due to incoherent or unthinkable psychic material. You also have defensive silence, which indicates the presence of unacceptable wishes and fantasies in the patient, and actually the utilization of this silence allows the patient to push aside those drives, and these defensive silences are pretty common in therapeutic work. Resistance, which is expressed through silence, can also arise due to a spectrum of emotions. So we can be defensive because of guilt, because of shame, because of fear of a retaliation from the analyst, but also from the feelings of loving and being loved. All of these can be threatening to the patient. We also have inactive silence, which Akhtar terms as deliberate withholding by the patient. This withholding can be of two types, one which serves the function of defense and the other which serves the function of discharge. As a defense, the silence saves the patient from personal shame or anticipated ridicule by the analyst. As a discharge, it is to mislead the analyst, control, and even render the analyst important to sort of engage them in an enactment. Next, we have symbolic silence, which is based in drive theory, and it understands silence to be a symbolic derivative of instinctual aims. Akhtar also notes contemplative silence, in which the patient is engaged in a private dialogue with their subjective inner objects, or they are trying to comprehend what is coming up in the work by sort of turning inwards. Usually it is best to not disturb the contemplative silence so that the patient can slowly digest what is happening. We also have regenerative silence, which is not to be confused with the just mentioned contemplative silence. So this is a type of ego replenishing quietude, a simple not communicating, primarily arising from the works of Winnicott. Last, we have blank silence, which is, like a benign type. It represents the merger of the self and the object. So Akhtar observes that such a silence usually occurs when the analyst presents the patient with a correct transference interpretation, and they do involve a degree of regression. Akhtar then closes this chapter with a discussion of silences from socio-cultural perspectives and moves on to the third chapter, which is titled Listening to Actions. Now, listening to actions, the chapter and the chapters ahead of that will be discussed in another video, so that all of them are given their due space. So this is it for this video. We'll meet you next time. So see you for the next video. Take care till then. Bye bye.